Many of us like reading books. What about reading your very own book and letting hundreds of thousands of people read it and enjoy it just as you enjoy your own book yourself? Many of us will meet an author or even become one in our lifetimes. As an author myself, I can inform you the many ways of writing fiction and nonfiction throughout my experience and what I can teach you from what I've learned through research. Writing a book on its own has steps depending on if you're writing nonfiction compared to fiction. Let us start out with fiction first. How to write fiction and how many types of fiction out there. Fiction itself is a very broad genre that covers many different types of topics. And for that entire genre, it's all fake. It's not real. It never will be real, or it could be real in the future. But right now, in our present time, it's not real. And it can vary from realistic fiction to fantasy, which will vary greatly in length. From the balanced career, most writers, on average, do not write as much as authors. Most writers, on average, write about maybe a couple of pages of whatever, especially during schoolwork. Most people don't write in their free time unless they like writing or they're very bored or they're taking notes for other things other than schoolwork or any other works like that. Most of them write shorter stories if they do want to become writers at first, which are very short. They vary from a few hundred words to a couple thousand words. And the ones that want to become an author will usually either write multiple short stories that become in one giant book compared to others that write only novels, which are very long. They can be up to 60,000 words up to 120,000 words, which is a very big difference. But most of that very depends on the genre. Excuse me, not the genre, the type of fiction that you're writing, especially like fantasy, which can be up in those higher ranges. Most common fiction out there is usually like realistic fiction, which is very easy to do. Most people like it, most don't. It's basically depends on who you are and what you like. Meanwhile, other types of writing can be novellas, which are usually in between a short story and a novel. Most novellas were popular back in like the 19th century and prior, since they were short but also very long, since most people back then didn't have the internet or other means of communication and reading like we do today. And most novellas today that are still written are usually romance books, which most people don't really read romance books unless they're older or the specific age group and demographic. Most people don't read them nowadays. And mostly for novels, most people's novels will range about 50,000 to 70,000, since most people don't have enough time to write a long giant novel which is 100,000 words or plus, unless you're writing science fiction or fantasy. Even though mostly fantasy and science fiction can actually push it even higher than 120,000 words or more. How to write a novel in fiction. What I learned from the Curtis Brown Creative, which is a group of authors and writers from the United Kingdom, writing a novel can take many months or even years before you complete it. In that case, it takes a lot of planning, which is very important for a novel since that's a big, giant story that you want to have correct and not want to mess up any at all compared to like short stories or novellas or anything shorter than that. From what I've learned from them is you have to complete multiple drafts to complete it at first, because your first draft, you don't want to, in like school, you don't want to write your first draft and that be your final draft, which most people do. Yeah, I do that too, which is a weakness. But most of us shouldn't do that, especially when you're writing a novel, which is something that you might have published and other people might read and they're going to rate it online and like in public and stuff. The pre-writing phase is the most important part for a novel, since when you're pre-writing, you want to make sure you have all your characters in line, their personality, what they look like, how it's going to go, and on the other side, you want to have your plot, your setting, and everything that's going to happen with those characters, and then you want to mix them together in your first draft and so far on there. Now that you know about fiction writing, let's go more over to nonfiction. Nonfiction writing compared to fictional writing is very different. Nonfiction is a type of writing that is based on true events that are real, that are happening today, or have happened in the past, which can be verifiable with facts and other things to back it up. From Income Spark, a reputable place where people go to learn about writing, and they also do some self-publishing, is that nonfiction can vary from a research paper, which takes a lot of research and time, compared to memoirs, which are very short or long, depending on who's rating it and what they're rating about. Usually it's about themselves and their lifetime. How to write nonfiction, there are two kinds. There are expository nonfiction and there's narrative nonfiction. Narrative nonfiction are autobiographies, usually stories about somebody or something that's gone on either in the past or it's happening right now in our moment. On the other side, there are expository nonfiction, which are usually ones that we read in school, especially in science class and math class, which are mainly textbooks and scholarly works that we all use to learn something of a topic rather than someone else telling us a story about someone else or something that happened in the past. To conclude, I have showed you the two types of writing, fiction and nonfiction. Now that we know that the types of fiction and how they can vary from writer to writer, and the types of nonfiction out there that are telling us a true story or explain to us something that we need to know, especially for research. Next time you have any idea about writing a book, go and start writing because the idea might be short in your head, but it could be a really good idea if you put it all onto paper, and other people might enjoy it as well. As long as you write every single day, you'll never forget about it, and it'll be a long and memorable time to enjoy for yourself and for many others to enjoy as well. Thank you.